She was humiliated and kicked out of the company gala just for bringing her baby, but what no one knew was that the mysterious CEO, watching from the shadows, had already fallen for her, and he wasn't about to let her go. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Emily Warren stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying mascara to her lashes as her 10-month-old daughter Lily babbled happily in the portable playpen behind her. The invitation to Morton Pharmaceuticals' annual gala sat on the counter, its embossed gold lettering catching the light. 6 months ago, she never would have considered attending such an event, but 6 months ago, Tom had still been alive. "Almost done, sweet pea," she called over her shoulder, smiling as Lily responded with an enthusiastic string of nonsensical sounds. She had debated for weeks whether to attend tonight's event, but her bank account had made the decision for her. As a newly hired junior research assistant, she needed to make connections if she wanted to advance. Tom's medical bills had depleted their savings, and the life insurance barely covered the mortgage payments. Emily applied a final coat of lipstick, a shade she hadn't worn since before Lily was born. Her black dress was simple but elegant, purchased second-hand but looking far more expensive than it had cost. She'd had to take it in at the waist. Grief had stripped 15 pounds from her already slender frame. "What do you think, Lily?" She turned to her daughter, striking a playful pose. "Will I impress all those pharmaceutical executives?" Lily offered a toothless grin and a drool bubble in response. The babysitter had canceled just an hour ago, claiming a sudden stomach virus. Emily had called everyone she could think of, but it was Saturday night, and no one was available on such short notice. She'd finally made the difficult decision to bring Lily with her. It wasn't ideal, but she had a diaper bag full of toys, bottles, and baby food. Lily was generally well-behaved, and Emily planned to stay only long enough to make her presence known to the senior staff. "We'll just make a quick appearance, say hello to Dr. Blackwell and a few others, and then we'll be home before your bedtime," she promised, lifting Lily into her arms and inhaling the sweet baby scent of her downy hair. The drive to the Grand Meridian Hotel took 20 minutes, during which Emily rehearsed potential conversation starters while Lily dozed in her car seat. She found parking in the massive garage beneath the hotel and carefully transferred her sleeping daughter to the baby carrier she'd strapped to her chest. It wasn't exactly a fashion statement with her cocktail dress, but it kept her hands free and Lily secure. Emily took a deep breath as the elevator ascended to the ballroom level, mentally preparing herself. This was her first formal event since Tom's funeral. She'd spent most of the past year either at his hospital bedside or caring for their newborn alone. Social interactions now felt like navigating a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a glittering scene. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over elegantly dressed attendees who milled about holding champagne flutes. Soft classical music played beneath the hum of conversation and occasional laughter. Emily hesitated, feeling suddenly conspicuous with a baby strapped to her chest. "You belong here just as much as anyone," she whispered to herself, one of the many affirmations her grief counselor had suggested. Straightening her shoulders, she stepped into the ballroom. She managed to grab a glass of water from a passing server and made her way toward a less crowded corner, scanning the room for familiar faces from the research department. Lily had awakened but remained contentedly quiet, wide eyes taking in the lights and colors. "Emily, you made it!" Dr. Sandra Chen, her direct supervisor, approached with a warm smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Lily. "And you brought company." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My babysitter canceled last minute. I hope it's not a problem. We won't stay long." "Well, it's certainly unexpected." Sandra's eyes darted around the room. "The CEO is making rounds tonight, Richard Morton himself. He rarely attends these functions, so everyone's a bit on edge." "I've never actually seen him in person," Emily admitted. "Morton Pharmaceuticals employed over 5,000 people, and Richard Morton was practically mythological to most of them, a brilliant scientific mind who had built a billion-dollar company from his breakthrough research in immunotherapy. "He's over there." Sandra discreetly nodded toward a tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo surrounded by a small group of attentive executives. Even from across the room, Richard Morton commanded attention. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a posture that suggested military background. He was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and intense focus as he listened to whoever was speaking to him. "I should introduce myself to Dr. Blackwell," Emily said, referring to the head of research. "He mentioned wanting to discuss my proposal for the autoimmune trial." "Good luck," Sandra replied, her attention already drifting to another colleague who had just arrived. Emily worked her way through the crowd, exchanging brief pleasantries with co-workers who gave curious or surprised glances at Lily. Most were polite but clearly taken aback by the presence of an infant at a formal corporate event. She had almost reached Dr. Blackwell when Lily began to fuss, making the small whimpering sounds that usually preceded a full cry. Emily gently bounced and patted her back, desperately hoping to avoid a meltdown. "Shh, sweetie. Just a little longer," she murmured, reaching into her clutch for a pacifier. As she did, she bumped into someone, causing water to slosh over the rim of her glass. "I'm so sorry," she began, looking up into the stern face of Patricia Winters, the company's HR director, known for her rigid adherence to protocol. "Mrs. Warren," Patricia said coldly, her gaze fixed on Lily, who was now squirming against the carrier. "This is a professional event, not a daycare center." Emily's throat tightened. "I understand. My childcare arrangements fell through at the last minute. We'll only stay briefly." Patricia's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "This event is for employees and invited guests only. A baby is neither." "I'm sorry, but I didn't have—" "It's disruptive and unprofessional," Patricia continued as if Emily hadn't spoken. "I must ask you to leave immediately." Emily felt as if she'd been slapped. Around them, conversation had quieted as people turned to watch the confrontation. Lily, sensing her mother's distress, began to cry in earnest. Emily started, but words failed her as humiliation burned through her chest. She clutched her water glass so tightly she feared it might shatter. "Is there a problem here?" A deep, authoritative voice cut through Lily's cries. Emily turned to find Richard Morton himself standing beside them, his steel-gray eyes taking in the scene with calculating precision. "Mr. Morton." Patricia's tone instantly transformed into deferential politeness. "I was just explaining to Mrs. Warren that children are not permitted at company functions. It's stated clearly in our event policies." Richard's gaze shifted to Emily, then to the crying baby against her chest. Something unreadable flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "And you are?" he asked Emily directly. "Emily Warren, sir, junior research assistant in Dr. Chen's immunotherapy team." She fought to keep her voice steady while continuing to soothe Lily. "I apologize for the disruption. I'll leave right away." Richard studied her for a moment longer, his expression inscrutable. Then he turned to Patricia. "Show me where in our policy it explicitly prohibits infants at company gatherings." Patricia blinked rapidly. "Well, it falls under inappropriate guests, of course. Section 4.3 of the Employee Handbook clearly states—" "I wrote the handbook, Ms. Winters. There is no such prohibition." His tone was calm, but left no room for argument. "Furthermore, I believe Mrs. Warren's research on maternal antibody transfer in immunotherapy treatment has significant potential. Her presence here tonight is valuable to the company." Emily stared at him in shock. He knew her research. She'd only been with the company for 4 months, and her proposal was still in the preliminary review stage. Patricia's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Of course, Mr. Morton, I misunderstood. My apologies." "None needed," he replied dismissively before turning back to Emily. "Mrs. Warren, If you'd accompany me, there are several investors interested in early-stage immunotherapy research. Your insights would be appreciated." Without waiting for her response, he placed a light hand at the small of her back, guiding her away from Patricia and the crowd of onlookers. Lily's cries had subsided to hiccuping sniffles. "I truly am sorry about this," Emily said once they were out of earshot. "My babysitter cancelled, and I thought it was important to attend, but I can see now it was inappropriate." "On the contrary," Richard replied, leading her toward a quieter area near the tall windows overlooking the city. "I find most corporate policies to be arbitrary restrictions created by people who lack the imagination to accommodate exceptions." He glanced down at Lily, who was now watching him with curious eyes. "What's her name?" "Lily. She's 10 months old. She has your eyes." It wasn't a question, but an observation, stated with the same analytical precision he probably applied to scientific data. "Everyone says that," Emily replied, unsure how to navigate this unexpected conversation with the CEO of her company. "You're a widow." Again, not a question. Emily nodded, surprised by his directness. "My husband died 6 months ago. Cancer." Something shifted in Richard's expression, a softening almost imperceptible. "I reviewed your research proposal last week. Your approach to using maternal immunologic adaptations as a model for cancer therapy is innovative, unconventional, but potentially groundbreaking." "Thank you," Emily said, genuinely moved that the CEO had not only read her work but remembered it. "It's still theoretical, but with the right resources—" "You'll have them," he interrupted. "I'm authorizing full funding and dedicated lab space effective Monday." Emily nearly dropped her water glass. "Mr. Morton, I don't know what to say. Say you'll join me for dinner next week to discuss the implementation details." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And bring Lily. I find her perspective refreshing among all these corporate sycophants." A small, startled laugh escaped Emily. Was Richard Morton, billionaire CEO and scientific genius, making a joke? "I'd like that," she found herself saying, though warning bells rang faintly in the back of her mind. This wasn't just a professional opportunity. There was something more in his gaze, something personal that both thrilled and terrified her. As if sensing her thoughts, Richard took a step back, restoring a professional distance between them. "Excellent. My assistant will contact you with the details." He glanced around the room. "I should continue my rounds. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mrs. Warren." "Emily," she corrected automatically. "Please call me Emily." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Emily," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Until next week." She watched him walk away, commanding attention as he moved through the crowd. Lily cooed softly, reaching out a tiny hand as if trying to grasp the strange man who had defended them. "I don't know what just happened either, sweet pea," Emily whispered, heart racing with a mixture of professional excitement and something else she wasn't ready to name. "But I think our lives just changed." The Monday following the gala, Emily arrived at work to find her small, shared lab space transformed. Her name adorned the door of what had previously been a storage room, now converted into a private research lab with brand new equipment she'd only dreamed of accessing. On the central workstation sat a sleek folder with Morton Pharmaceuticals' logo, containing detailed approval for her research proposal and a budget that made her lightheaded. "Quite the upgrade, isn't it?" Dr. Blackwell commented from the doorway, his tone a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Morton must see something special in your research." "Or in me," Emily thought but didn't say. Instead, she nodded professionally. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to prove my theories." "Just be careful," Dr. Blackwell said, lowering his voice. "Morton isn't known for patience with projects that don't yield results quickly. His interest can vanish as suddenly as it appears." With that cryptic warning, he left her to settle into her new workspace. Throughout the day, colleagues stopped by, their congratulations thinly veiling their questions about her sudden rise from obscurity. By afternoon, Emily had heard at least 3 different rumors about why Richard Morton had singled her out, each more outlandish than the last. "They're saying you saved his mother from choking at the gala," Sandra Chen said, perching on a stool in Emily's new lab, "or that you're his long-lost cousin. My personal favorite is that you have compromising photos of board members." Emily laughed despite her discomfort. People really need better hobbies. "So what is the truth?" Sandra pressed. "One minute, Patricia Winters is about to throw you and your adorable baby out, and the next, Morton's personally championing you. No one's ever seen him do that." "He's interested in my research approach," Emily said firmly. "That's all." Sandra raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. "Well, whatever the reason, make the most of it. Opportunities like this don't come along often." After Sandra left, Emily found herself staring at her phone, where a text message from an unknown number had appeared during their conversation. "Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. Car will collect you at 6:30. Please confirm. RM." Her finger hovered over the screen. The speed with which everything was happening left her dizzy. Part of her wanted to decline, to prove that her research stood on its own merits and didn't require special dinners with the CEO. But the practical side of her, the side that checked her dwindling bank account and remembered Lily's growing expenses, knew better than to refuse. "Confirmed. Thank you. EW," she replied after careful consideration. The response came immediately. "Looking forward to it." Those 3 simple words sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, one she hadn't felt since Tom. The sensation was so foreign after months of grief that she almost didn't recognize it. Guilt followed swiftly. It had only been 6 months since she'd buried her husband. How could she feel anything for another man so soon? "It's just professional excitement," she told herself firmly, focusing back on the research documents before her. Nothing more. The next evening, after dropping Lily with her neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who had enthusiastically agreed to babysit when Emily mentioned a business dinner with the CEO, Emily found herself pacing her small living room in a navy blue dress that had survived from her pre-pregnancy days. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she'd applied makeup with more care than she had in months. "This isn't a date," she reminded her reflection. "It's a business dinner." At exactly 6:30, her phone pinged with a text. "Your car has arrived." Outside her modest suburban home waited not the company car she'd expected, but a sleek black Bentley. A uniformed driver held the door open for her. "Good evening, Mrs. Warren. Mr. Morton is meeting you at the restaurant." The drive took them away from the city center toward the exclusive hillside area where Seattle's wealthiest residents lived. They eventually pulled up to what appeared to be a private residence, a modernist glass and steel structure perched on the hillside with a breathtaking view of the city and Puget Sound beyond. "I think there's been a mistake," Emily said, confused. "This isn't a restaurant." "No mistake, ma'am. Mr. Morton prefers to dine at home when discussing business matters. His chef has prepared dinner." Emily hesitated, alarm bells ringing in her head. Meeting in a public restaurant was one thing. Entering her boss's private home was quite another. "I can return you home if you're uncomfortable," the driver offered, sensing her reluctance. Emily considered it for a moment. Then, remembering the lab equipped specifically for her research and the opportunity it represented, she shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll go in." The driver escorted her to the front entrance where the door opened before they reached it. Richard Morton stood in the doorway, dressed more casually than at the gala in dark slacks and a gray cashmere sweater that matched his eyes. "Emily," he greeted her, his gaze taking in her appearance with undisguised appreciation. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." She stepped into a space that seemed to be mostly windows, with the city lights spread out below like a blanket of stars. The interior was minimalist but warm. leather, wood, and steel combining in a design that was masculine but not austere. "Your home is beautiful," she said, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "It serves its purpose." Richard gestured toward the view. "Though I rarely take the time to appreciate this. Work consumes most of my waking hours." "I understand that all too well," Emily replied, thinking of the long nights she'd spent at the lab while Tom was sick, trying to find something, anything that might help him. Richard seemed to read her thoughts. "Your husband's cancer? Pancreatic?" She nodded, surprised. Stage 4 by the time they found it. He was only 34. "I reviewed his case files yesterday." Emily nearly choked on her wine. "You what? How did you even access those?" "I own 3 hospitals in the Seattle area, including the one where he was treated." Richard stated this not as a boast, but as a simple fact. His oncologist tried an experimental protocol that my company was developing. It failed. The bluntness of his statement should have hurt, but Emily found it strangely comforting compared to the euphemisms others used. "Everything failed," she said quietly. "That's why my research focuses on earlier intervention models. By the time traditional treatments begin, it's often too late." Richard's eyes held hers with that same intensity she'd noticed at the gala. "That's precisely why I'm interested in your approach. You're thinking beyond conventional frameworks." He led her to a dining area where a table had been set for 2 overlooking the water. A chef appeared silently with the first course, a delicate seafood appetizer that Emily would have appreciated more if she weren't so nervous. "Tell me about Lily," Richard said as they began eating. "She seems remarkably well adjusted for a child who's lost a parent." "She's too young to understand," Emily replied, a familiar ache in her chest. "She was only 4 months old when Tom died. Sometimes that feels like a blessing. She won't remember the hospital rooms, the decline. But other times—" She paused, surprised at herself for sharing so personally. "Other times I'm sad that she'll never know her father, except through pictures and my stories." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they're shaped more by present love than absent history." "Do you have children?" Emily asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about his personal life despite his apparent knowledge of hers. A shadow crossed his face. "No. My work hasn't allowed for a traditional family life." "And your parents? Do they live in Seattle?" "Both deceased," he replied matter-of-factly. "My father when I was 7, my mother while I was in graduate school." "I'm sorry," Emily said, recognizing in him the same self-contained solitude she'd felt after losing everyone she loved except Lily. "It was long ago." He changed the subject smoothly. "Your research proposal mentions utilizing certain compounds that aren't yet in our standard protocols. I've arranged for them to be synthesized for your use." The conversation shifted to scientific matters, and Emily found herself engaged in the most stimulating professional discussion she'd had in years. Richard wasn't just a businessman. He was a brilliant scientific mind, asking questions that pushed her thinking further and offering insights that opened new avenues of exploration. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate souffle that melted on her tongue, Emily had almost forgotten to be nervous. She was leaning forward, sketching a molecular pathway on the back of a napkin, when she realized Richard was watching her with a faint smile. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You forget yourself when you're passionate about something," he observed. "It's refreshing. Most people in my presence are too busy calculating what I want to hear." Emily set down her pen. "I'm still calculating whether funding my research is a professional decision or a personal one." His smile vanished, replaced by that inscrutable expression. "Would it matter?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I won't have my work undermined by rumors that I earned my position any way other than merit." Richard leaned back, studying her with renewed interest. "Your candor is unusual. Most people in your position would avoid challenging me directly." Most people in my position haven't watched someone they love die while bureaucracy delayed treatments that might have saved him, Emily countered. I don't have time for games, Mr. Morton. Richard, he corrected, and for the record, your research funding is based entirely on its scientific merit. But I won't pretend I'm not personally intrigued by the scientist behind it. Heat crept up Emily's neck. This dinner was veering into territory she wasn't prepared to navigate. She glanced at her watch. It's getting late. I should get back to Lily. Richard nodded, making no move to stop her. Of course, the driver will take you home. He stood as she did, then added, I'd like to see your preliminary results next week. Perhaps another dinner? Emily hesitated. The professional opportunity was undeniable, but the personal undercurrent was growing harder to ignore. Let's meet at the lab instead, she suggested. I'd like to show you the actual work. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. As you wish. At her front door an hour later, Emily found herself replaying every moment of the evening, analyzing the subtext of each exchange. Richard Morton was unlike anyone she'd ever met, brilliant, direct, and undeniably attractive in a way that had nothing to do with his wealth or power. As she paid Mrs. Patel and checked on her sleeping daughter, Emily reminded herself of the complications. He was her boss. She was still grieving, and there was something guarded about Richard, depths he kept carefully hidden behind his controlled exterior. Yet as she lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, it wasn't the research opportunity that kept her awake. It was the memory of steel-gray eyes watching her with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time since Tom died. This is a terrible idea, she whispered to herself, even as she wondered what would happen when they met again. Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into her research with renewed vigor. The state-of-the-art equipment in her private lab allowed her to run experiments she'd previously only theorized about. She often worked late into the evening, grateful that Morton Pharmaceuticals offered an on-site daycare facility where Lily could stay until she finished. Richard kept his distance professionally, communicating mainly through emails requesting progress updates. But every Friday, like clockwork, he would appear at her lab just as she was preparing to leave. Weekly status report? He would ask, as if these visits were purely professional. Yet he always ended up spending at least an hour discussing not just her research but a wide range of topics, from advances in molecular biology to books they'd both read. Emily found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. Richard's mind was fascinating. He connected concepts from disparate fields in ways she'd never considered, pushing her research in innovative directions. You know, people are talking, Sandra said one day as they shared lunch in the company cafeteria. The CEO doesn't make weekly personal visits to junior researchers. Emily concentrated on her salad. He's invested in the project. I think he's invested in the researcher, Sandra replied with a knowing smile. Not that I blame him. You're brilliant, gorgeous, and the only person I've ever seen stand up to him. It's not like that, Emily protested, though a small voice in her head whispered that perhaps it was exactly like that. Well, whatever it is, Patricia Winters is watching you like a hawk. She's convinced you're getting special treatment. I'm getting special equipment, Emily corrected, because my research requires it. My work speaks for itself. Sandra raised her hands in surrender. Hey, I'm on your side. Just giving you a heads up about the office politics. That afternoon, when Emily went to pick up Lily from daycare, she found Richard already there, crouched at eye level with her daughter who was showing him a colorful building block. Blue, Lily said proudly, offering it to him. Very good, Richard replied with surprising gentleness. And this one? He held up a red block. Wed, Lily answered, clapping her hands. Emily watched from the doorway, struck by the incongruity of the powerful CEO sitting cross-legged on a playmat with a toddler. When Richard glanced up and noticed her, something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him momentarily look younger. I was passing by, he explained, standing and straightening his impeccable suit. "She's remarkably verbal for her age." "She started talking early," Emily said, lifting Lily into her arms. "Tom used to read to her for hours, even when she was newborn. I think it helped." Richard nodded, his gaze lingering on Lily's face. "She has your determination. I watched her try to stack blocks twice her height. When they fell, she simply started again." Emily smiled. "She's stubborn, like her father." An awkward silence fell between them, Tom's ghost suddenly present in the bright daycare room. "I'd like to show you something," Richard said finally. "If you and Lily are free this weekend, it's related to your research but not in the lab." Emily hesitated. A weekend outing felt definitively less professional than their Friday lab discussions. "It's the Pharmaceutical Botanical Gardens," he added, sensing her reluctance. "We maintain extensive collections of medicinal plants, including several compounds similar to those you're synthesizing. I think it might spark some ideas for your next phase." The Botanical Gardens were technically a work venue, Emily reasoned, and she had been meaning to take Lily somewhere enriching. "That sounds interesting. Saturday morning? Perfect. I'll send a car at 9. As he walked away, Emily caught the daycare director watching them with poorly concealed curiosity. Another person adding to the gossip mill, no doubt. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, a rarity for Seattle in early spring. Emily dressed Lily in a cheerful yellow sweater and packed a diaper bag with snacks and toys. When the now familiar black Bentley pulled up, she was surprised to see Richard himself emerge from the driver's seat rather than the usual chauffeur. "You drive?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. A hint of amusement crossed his face. "Contrary to rumor, I don't actually have servants perform all basic functions." Emily laughed as he helped secure Lily's car seat. "I didn't mean it that way, it's just you have drivers for everything." "Time efficiency," he explained, closing Lily's door and opening Emily's. "I can make calls and review documents while being driven, but today is not about efficiency." The Botanical Gardens were located 30 miles outside the city on several hundred acres of carefully maintained land. As they drove through the gates, Emily saw not the manicured public gardens she'd expected, but a sprawling research facility with multiple greenhouses and outdoor growing areas. "Most people don't know this exists," Richard said, parking near a modern glass building. "We maintain over 5,000 species of medicinal plants here, studying their properties and pharmaceutical applications." Inside, he led them through security using a biometric scanner, then down a corridor to a large atrium filled with tropical plants. The air was warm and humid, rich with the scent of earth and green growing things. "This is amazing," Emily breathed, taking in the diversity of plants surrounding them. Lily squirmed in her arms, excited by the new environment. "It's one of my favorite places," Richard admitted, gently touching the leaf of a large flowering plant. "When research stalls or business problems seem overwhelming, I come here to remind myself why I started this company in the first place. Nature has already invented most of the solutions we need. We just have to learn how to listen." Emily studied him, surprised by this glimpse of philosophy beneath his usual pragmatism. "I wouldn't have pegged you as a nature enthusiast." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with that now familiar intensity. "Yet." The word hung between them, full of implication. Richard cleared his throat and gestured to a woman approaching in a lab coat. "Dr. Lin oversees our ethnobotanical research. She's prepared some samples related to your immunotherapy work." The next few hours passed in a blur of scientific discovery. Dr. Lin showed Emily plants whose compounds had properties similar to those she was working with in the lab, offering insights on extraction methods and potential applications. Richard occasionally added his own observations, revealing a depth of botanical knowledge that surprised her. Throughout their tour, Lily remained contentedly in Emily's arms or toddling alongside them, fascinated by the colors and textures of the plants. When she began to tire, Richard suggested lunch at the small cafe on the premises. "You're good with her," Emily observed, as Richard entertained Lily with a game of peekaboo while Emily prepared a bottle. He looked momentarily startled, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. "Children are refreshingly honest. They haven't learned to hide their thoughts behind social conventions." "Unlike CEOs?" Emily teased gently. "Especially unlike CEOs." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "In my position, showing too much of yourself is a liability. People look for weaknesses to exploit." "That sounds lonely," Emily said before she could stop herself. Richard's expression turned guarded. "It's necessary. The company employs thousands of people. Their livelihoods depend on my maintaining control." There it was again, that glimpse of something deeper, more complex beneath his composed exterior. Emily wanted to ask more, to understand what had shaped him into this controlled, isolated man. But Lily chose that moment to fuss, the morning's excitement finally catching up to her. "She needs a nap," Emily said, gathering their things. "We should probably head back." Richard nodded, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Of course." The drive back to the city was quiet, Lily sleeping soundly in her car seat. Emily found herself stealing glances at Richard's profile as he drove, noting the firm set of his jaw and the slight furrow between his brows that never fully disappeared, even when he smiled. "Thank you for today," she said as they neared her house. "It was truly enlightening. I have some new ideas for the extraction process that might increase efficacy." "I'm glad." He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I've scheduled a presentation of your research to the board next month. They should see the potential I do." Emily's pulse quickened. A board presentation could mean expanded funding, even fast-tracking to clinical trials if they were impressed. It was an incredible opportunity, but also immense pressure. "That's unexpected," she managed. "Is my work ready for that level of scrutiny?" "It will be," he said with absolute confidence. "I don't present half-formed ideas to my board." As he pulled into her driveway, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Richard Morton's interest in her research was the opportunity of a lifetime, but his interest in her personally was becoming harder to ignore or resist. "Emily," he said as she gathered Lily's sleeping form and the diaper bag, "there's a benefit gala for the Children's Hospital next weekend. Would you and Lily accompany me?" Her heart stuttered. This was definitely not a work event. "As your guests or as Morton Pharmaceuticals employees?" "As my guests," he answered without hesitation. "Though if you'd prefer to maintain professional boundaries, I understand." Emily looked into his gray eyes, searching for hidden motives but finding only genuine interest. 6 months of grief had left her raw and uncertain, but also aware of how fleeting life could be. Tom would want her to be happy, wouldn't he? "We'd be honored," she heard herself say, "but on one condition." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you let me arrive on my own terms? No company car, no special treatment? Just 3 people attending an event together?" A slow smile spread across his face, unguarded for once. "Deal." As Emily carried Lily into the house, she found herself both terrified and exhilarated by what she'd just agreed to. It wasn't just a date, it was a public statement. The reclusive CEO of Morton Pharmaceuticals escorting a junior researcher and her baby to a high-profile charity event would certainly set tongues wagging. Yet as she laid Lily in her crib, Emily realized she cared less about the gossip than she would have expected. Something about Richard Morton made her feel both safer and more alive than she had in months. Whatever was developing between them, she was no longer certain she wanted to stop it. "What am I doing, Tom?" she whispered to the photograph of her late husband on the nightstand. As always, his smiling face offered no answers, only the memory of a love that had ended far too soon. "You're really going through with this?" Sandra asked, perched on Emily's bed while Emily rummaged through her closet. A public date with Richard Morton? It's not a date, Emily protested weakly. It's a charity event, where you're attending as his personal guest, not as an employee. Sandra raised an eyebrow. That's the definition of a date, honey. Emily sighed, pulling out a simple black dress only to discard it immediately. Nothing she owned seemed appropriate for one of Seattle's most prestigious charity events. Maybe this is a mistake. I have nothing to wear. And what about Lily? What if she fusses during speeches or something? That's why I'm here, Sandra said, standing up and pulling a garment bag from behind the door. I figured you'd be freaking out, so I brought reinforcements. The dress inside was a deep emerald green with a flattering silhouette that managed to be both elegant and understated. Emily touched the fabric reverently. Sandra, this is gorgeous, but I can't. You can and you will, Sandra interrupted. It's my sister's. She's your size and owes me a favor. As for Lily, Richard specifically invited her too, right? He knows what he's getting into. 2 hours later, Emily stood before her mirror, barely recognizing herself. The green dress fit as if made for her, and Sandra had styled her hair in soft waves that framed her face. For the first time since Tom's death, Emily looked fully alive again, a hint of color in her cheeks that wasn't just makeup. "Mama, pretty!" Lily exclaimed from her playpen, clapping her hands. Emily smiled, bending down to pick up her daughter, resplendent in a cream-colored dress with a tiny green ribbon that matched Emily's gown. "And you're the prettiest of all, sweet pea." The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage before opening the door. Richard stood on her porch in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his usually severe expression softening visibly when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Thank you," Emily replied, suddenly shy despite weeks of professional interaction. "So do you. I mean handsome, not beautiful. Though you could be beautiful too, objectively speaking." She stopped herself, mortified by her nervous babbling. To her surprise, Richard laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound she'd never heard from him before. "I'll accept either compliment." His gaze shifted to Lily, who was watching him curiously from Emily's arms. "And you, Miss Lily, are absolutely stunning." Lily responded by reaching for him, a gesture that startled both adults. After a moment's hesitation, Richard carefully took her from Emily, holding her with surprising ease. "She doesn't usually go to strangers," Emily said, watching them. "We're not strangers anymore, are we?" Richard asked softly, addressing Lily but glancing at Emily with a question in his eyes that went far beyond the simple words. On the drive to the gala, Emily found herself studying Richard as he skillfully navigated his Aston Martin through evening traffic. He'd insisted on driving again rather than using a chauffeur, another small gesture that felt unexpectedly intimate. "You seem tense," he observed, glancing at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Just nervous," she admitted. "I've never been to something this high profile before, and people will talk. About us, I mean." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "Does that bother you?" "Not for myself," Emily clarified, "but I don't want it to affect how my work is perceived, or to create problems for you with the board." He seemed to relax at her explanation. "The board doesn't dictate my personal life. As for your work, it stands on its own merit. Anyone who can't separate the two isn't worth your concern." "Easy for you to say when you're the CEO," Emily pointed out. "It wasn't always easy," he replied cryptically, pulling into the valet line at the Grand Atrium, Seattle's most prestigious event venue. Emily had expected attention when they arrived, but nothing prepared her for the flash of cameras as Richard helped her from the car, then carefully lifted Lily into his arms. The press covering the charity event clearly recognized the reclusive CEO, and his appearance with a young woman and child was evidently newsworthy. "Mr. Morton, is this your family?" one reporter called out. Richard's arm slipped protectively around Emily's waist as he guided her past the press line without responding. Lily, startled by the commotion, buried her face against his shoulder. "I'm sorry about that," he murmured as they entered the grand ballroom. "I should have warned you." "It's fine," Emily said, though her heart was racing. "But maybe I should take Lily now." Richard relinquished the child reluctantly. "Of course. Let me get you both something to drink." As he walked toward the bar, Emily took a moment to absorb her surroundings. The ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with crystalline decorations and soft blue lighting creating the illusion of ice and snow. Seattle's wealthiest and most influential people mingled throughout the space, their jewelry catching the light as they laughed and conversed. "Emily Warren?" A woman's voice broke through her reverie. Emily turned to find herself face to face with Patricia Winters, whose smile didn't reach her cold eyes. "Ms. Winters," Emily acknowledged politely, "I didn't realize you would be here tonight." "I'm on the hospital board," Patricia replied. "Unlike some, I earned my invitation through years of community service, not by catching the CEO's eye." The barb was unmistakable. Emily shifted Lily to her other hip, buying time to compose a response that wouldn't worsen the obvious animosity. "The Children's Hospital does wonderful work," she said finally. "I'm honored to support their mission, regardless of how the invitation came about." Patricia's eyes narrowed. A word of advice from someone who's seen Morton's interests come and go: don't mistake professional opportunity for personal connection. He'll discard you just as quickly as he elevated you. "Is there a problem here?" Richard had returned, carrying 2 glasses. His tone was pleasant, but Emily noticed the dangerous glint in his eyes. "Not at all," Patricia replied smoothly. "Just welcoming our newest charity supporter, if you'll excuse me." As she walked away, Richard handed Emily a sparkling water. "I apologize for that. Patricia sometimes forgets her boundaries." "It's fine," Emily said, though the encounter had left her rattled. "She seems convinced I've somehow manipulated my way into your good graces." "Patricia has applied for 7 executive positions in the past decade," Richard explained. "I've rejected her each time due to her inability to work collaboratively. She believes it's personal." "Is it?" Emily asked boldly. Richard's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Perhaps partially. I don't trust people who treat subordinates differently than superiors. You've never changed your behavior based on someone's rank. That's rare." Before Emily could respond, they were approached by an older couple, the woman's face lighting up at the sight of Lily. "Richard, what a delightful surprise," the woman said warmly. "You never attend these functions." "Dr. and Mrs. Chen," Richard greeted them. "May I introduce Emily Warren and her daughter Lily?" "Emily, Dr. Chen is the Chief of Pediatric Oncology at the Children's Hospital." "It's a pleasure," Emily said, shaking hands with the distinguished-looking doctor. "Your work in immunotherapy protocols for childhood leukemia is groundbreaking." Dr. Chen looked pleased. "You're familiar with my research?" "Emily is developing a novel approach to maternal antibody transfer applications in cancer treatment," Richard explained with unmistakable pride. "She's one of our most promising researchers." "Fascinating," Dr. Chen replied, his interest clearly piqued. "I'd love to hear more about it. Perhaps you could visit the hospital laboratory sometime?" As they fell into an animated discussion about research methodologies, Mrs. Chen offered to hold Lily, who went to her willingly. Richard watched the interaction with an expression Emily couldn't quite decipher, something between satisfaction and wistfulness. The evening progressed more comfortably than Emily had anticipated. Richard stayed attentively by her side, introducing her to influential people in the medical research community. Rather than diminishing her credibility, his obvious respect for her intellect opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a junior researcher. After dinner and the charity auction, while a small orchestra played and couples took to the dance floor, Richard suggested they step outside onto the terrace for fresh air. Lily had fallen asleep in Emily's arms, her head nestled against her mother's shoulder. "You've made quite an impression tonight," Richard said as they stood looking out over Seattle's twinkling skyline. "Dr. Chen rarely invites outside researchers to his lab." "Thanks to your introduction," Emily acknowledged. I merely opened the door. You walked through it with your own brilliance." He turned to face her fully. "That's what drew me to you from the beginning. Your mind, your determination, your refusal to accept conventional limitations." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks at the intensity of his gaze. "I thought it was my adorable baby who first caught your attention," she deflected. "Lily was certainly a factor," he conceded, gently brushing a strand of hair from the sleeping child's face. "She reminds me of my sister." Emily blinked in surprise. "You have a sister? You never mentioned family." A shadow crossed Richard's face. "Had. Catherine died when she was 4. I was 10. Richard, I'm so sorry," Emily said softly, the revelation explaining so much about his guarded nature. "It was a long time ago," he replied, his tone suggesting otherwise. "Leukemia. The treatments then were crude, brutal even. I watched her suffer for months before she died." His hands gripped the terrace railing. "That's why I founded Morton Pharmaceuticals, to develop better treatments, to spare other families what mine endured." Emily shifted Lily to one arm and placed her free hand over his. "That's why my research matters to you. It's not just science, it's personal." "Everything about you has become personal to me, Emily," he admitted, turning his hand to grasp hers. "More than is wise, perhaps." The vulnerability in his typically composed face made her heart ache. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips softly to his. For a moment he remained perfectly still, as if afraid to shatter the moment. Then his free hand came up to cup her cheek as he kissed her back with gentle restraint. When they parted, Emily saw uncertainty in his eyes that matched her own. This was uncharted territory for both of them. She, still carrying the weight of grief. He, armored by years of emotional isolation. "I didn't plan for this," she whispered. "For you. Nor I for you," he replied. "But here we are." Lily stirred against Emily's shoulder, whimpering softly in her sleep. Richard checked his watch. "It's late. I should get you both home." The drive back was quiet, a comfortable silence settling between them as they each processed what had happened. When they reached Emily's house, Richard insisted on carrying the sleeping Lily inside, gently placing her in her crib with a tenderness that made Emily's throat tighten. At the front door, he paused. "I'm leaving for New York tomorrow. Board meetings and investor presentations. I'll be gone a week." "Oh," Emily said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good luck with the meetings." "I'd like to call you," he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Not about work." Emily smiled, her heart lightening. "I'd like that too." He brushed his fingers along her cheek, then leaned in for another brief, soft kiss. "Good night, Emily." She watched from the doorway as he walked to his car, his tall figure silhouetted in the moonlight. Only when he had driven away did she close the door, leaning against it as the reality of the evening washed over her. She had kissed Richard Morton. More significantly, he had kissed her back. And somehow, instead of feeling guilty or confused, she felt a quiet certainty that Tom would understand. Life was moving forward, as it had to, as he would have wanted it to. For the first time in 6 months, Emily went to bed with hope rather than grief as her primary companion. Emily arrived at work Monday morning to find her face splashed across the business section of the Seattle Tribune. "Morton Pharmaceuticals CEO steps out with mystery woman and child," the headline declared above a photo of Richard guiding her and Lily past the press line, his arm protectively around her waist. "Oh God," she muttered, quickly folding the paper as Sandra appeared in her lab doorway. "Too late. Everyone's seen it," Sandra said, waving her phone where the same photo was displayed. "You've gone viral in the corporate world. Billionaire CEO's secret family is trending." "That's ridiculous," Emily protested. "It was one charity event." One charity event where Seattle's most eligible bachelor showed up with a woman and child nobody knew existed. Sandra perched on a lab stool. "You have to admit it looks significant." Emily groaned, burying her face in her hands. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Now everyone will think my research funding is because we're… She couldn't even finish the sentence. Dating? In a relationship? Madly in love? Sandra supplied helpfully. Are any of those true? I don't know, Emily admitted, remembering the kiss they'd shared. It's complicated. Well, uncomplicate it fast. Patricia Winters just called an ethics committee meeting regarding conflicts of interest in research funding allocation. Emily's stomach dropped. She can't do that. She can try, Sandra said grimly, though picking a fight with the CEO seems like career suicide to me. Throughout the day, Emily felt eyes following her everywhere, in the cafeteria, the hallways, even the bathroom. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms, only to resume in whispers when she left. By afternoon, she was seriously considering hiding in her lab for the remainder of the week. Her phone pinged with a text message from Richard. Just landed in NY, saw the papers. I'm sorry about the publicity. Don't let it distract you. Emily stared at the message, unsure how to respond. It felt oddly formal after the intimacy they'd shared on the terrace. Before she could reply, another message appeared. I miss seeing you, and Lily. Call tonight? The simple admission made her smile despite her frustration. We miss you too, she typed back. Call after 8. Lily will be asleep, but at least I'll be home. Just as she set down her phone, Dr. Blackwell appeared at her lab door. Warren, my office, please. Emily followed him with a sense of dread, painfully aware of the stares from colleagues as they passed. Inside his office, Dr. Blackwell gestured for her to sit, his expression unreadable. I assume you've seen the newspapers, he began. Yes, sir. I want to assure you that my relationship with Mr. Morton won't affect my professional… Dr. Blackwell held up a hand, cutting her off. I'm not concerned about your professionalism, Emily. I'm concerned about the ethics committee Patricia has convened. She's suggesting your research doesn't merit the funding and resources it's received. Emily felt her face flush with indignation. My research stands on its own merits. The preliminary results are promising. I agree, Dr. Blackwell said, surprising her, which is why I'm personally presenting your latest data at the committee meeting tomorrow. Morton is the CEO, but I'm still head of research. My endorsement carries weight. Relief washed over her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He fixed her with a stern look. Your work is innovative, but it's also early stage. If the data doesn't continue to support your hypotheses, no personal connection to Richard Morton will save the project. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Emily replied, and I wouldn't want it any other way. That evening, Emily paced her living room after putting Lily to bed, waiting for Richard's call. When her phone finally rang at 8:15, she answered immediately. Hey, she said, suddenly shy despite the anticipation she'd felt all day. Hey, yourself. Richard's voice sounded tired but warm. How bad was it today? On a scale of 1 to public humiliation? About a 7? Emily sank onto her sofa. Patricia's called an ethics committee meeting to review my research funding. Richard's tone hardened. I'll call the board chair. This stops now. No, Emily said firmly. Don't interfere. Dr. Blackwell is presenting my data tomorrow. Let the science speak for itself. A long pause followed. You continue to surprise me, Richard finally said. Most people would welcome my intervention. I'm not most people, Emily reminded him. And if we're going to explore whatever this is between us, I need to know my work stands independently. Fair enough, he conceded, though it's difficult not to protect what matters to me. The simple statement made her heart skip. I can protect myself professionally, she said softly. Personally is another matter. Tell me about your day, Richard said, changing the subject. Beyond the corporate drama. Emily found herself relaxing as she described her latest experimental results, Lily's newest words, and the ridiculous rumors Sandra had collected. Richard listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed how closely he'd been following her research. "I should let you get some rest," he said eventually. "It's late there." "Wait," Emily said, not ready to end the connection. "Tell me about New York. How were your meetings?" Richard described his day in surprisingly candid detail. The board members who frustrated him, the potential investors he was courting, even the restaurant where he'd eaten dinner alone. "I wish you were here," he said unexpectedly. "Both of you. This hotel suite feels particularly empty tonight." The naked honesty in his voice made Emily's breath catch. "Richard, what are we doing? Is this just, I don't know, temporary attraction? Because my life is complicated. I have Lily to consider and my career and your grief for Tom," Richard finished gently. "I know. I'm not asking for promises, Emily. I'm just telling you that for the first time in years I find myself thinking about someone beyond work and obligations. It's unsettling, exhilarating, terrifying." Emily smiled, hearing her own feelings echoed back to her. "That about sums it up. Let's take this one day at a time," he suggested. "No pressure, no expectations beyond honesty." "I'd like that," she agreed, relief mingling with anticipation. They talked for another hour before reluctantly saying goodnight. Emily went to bed feeling more confident about facing the next day, regardless of what Patricia Winters might throw at her. The ethics committee meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Emily tried to focus on her lab work all morning, but her nerves made precision difficult. At 1:45, she finally gave up and headed to the conference room where her professional fate would be decided. Dr. Blackwell was already there, reviewing her data slides. "Ah, Warren, good. I wanted to run through the key points once more." They were deeply engrossed in discussion when the committee members began filing in. Patricia entered last, her expression souring when she saw Emily. "This is a closed meeting," she objected. "The subject of the review shouldn't be present." "I invited Dr. Warren as the primary researcher," Dr. Blackwell said firmly. "She can best address technical questions about the data." Patricia's lips thinned, but she took her seat without further protest. The committee chair, Dr. Maxwell from Legal Affairs, called the meeting to order. "We're here to review concerns about potential conflicts of interest in the funding allocation for Dr. Emily Warren's immunotherapy research," he began. "Ms. Winters, please present your concerns." Patricia stood, distributing folders to each committee member. "As you can see from these photographs and news reports, Dr. Warren has entered into a personal relationship with CEO Richard Morton, who personally authorized exceptional funding and resources for her project, bypassing normal review channels. This represents a clear conflict of interest and inappropriate use of company resources." Emily maintained a neutral expression, though her hands clenched beneath the table. "Dr. Blackwell," the chair continued, "you oversee all research. What is your assessment?" Dr. Blackwell stood, adjusting his glasses. "My assessment is that Patricia Winters is wasting this committee's valuable time." He began presenting Emily's data with methodical precision, highlighting the promising preliminary results and potential market applications. "Morton Pharmaceuticals exists to develop life-saving treatments," he concluded. "Dr. Warren's approach has shown a 62% improvement in targeted immunotherapy efficacy in preliminary trials. Whether she and Richard Morton attended a charity event together is irrelevant to the scientific merit of her work." Emily felt a surge of gratitude toward her department head as the committee members nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Warren?" Dr. Maxwell addressed her directly. "Did Mr. Morton express personal interest in you before or after reviewing your research proposal?" Emily met his gaze steadily. "After, sir. He approached me at the company gala when I was presenting my initial findings to Dr. Chen. Until that point, we'd never spoken." "And has your personal relationship influenced your research direction or reporting?" "No, sir. The only influence Mr. Morton has had on my work is providing the resources to pursue promising avenues more quickly. All results are documented according to company protocols and subject to peer review." Dr. Maxwell considered this, then turned to Patricia. Ms. Winters, do you have evidence of falsified data or misuse of company resources beyond the accelerated funding approval? Patricia's confidence wavered. Not at this time, but… Then this committee finds no ethical violation, Dr. Maxwell interrupted. The funding allocation, while expedited, followed proper channels through Dr. Blackwell's office. Dr. Warren's research will continue as planned with standard quarterly reviews. He stood to signal the meeting's end. I'll inform the board that the matter has been resolved. As the room cleared, Emily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dr. Blackwell gave her shoulder a brief, awkward pat. Back to work, Warren. I expect those Phase 2 results by next week. Yes, sir, and thank you. He nodded briskly before departing, leaving Emily alone with Patricia, who was gathering her materials with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over, Patricia said quietly. You may have fooled the committee, but I know there's more to your sudden rise than scientific merit. You're right, Emily replied, surprising the older woman. There is more. There's determination, grief, and the desperate need to ensure other families don't lose loved ones to treatments that destroy as much as they heal. If that motivation threatens you, I'm sorry. She walked out before Patricia could respond, head high despite the emotional exhaustion weighing on her. In her lab, she found a small package waiting on her desk with a note from the mailroom. Delivered by courier, marked urgent. Inside was a snow globe of the New York skyline and a handwritten note. Thinking of you both while navigating this concrete jungle. Your research deserves every resource we can provide. The world needs your mind. Well, we can discuss that when I return. R. Emily smiled, placing the snow globe beside her computer monitor. Whatever storm Patricia Winters might still be brewing, whatever complications lay ahead in balancing her professional and personal relationships with Richard, she felt equipped to face them. That evening, she sent Richard a simple text with a photo of Lily holding the snow globe. We're stronger than the storm. Hurry home. The week of Richard's absence stretched longer than Emily had anticipated. Their nightly phone calls became a ritual she looked forward to. A private space where they discussed everything from molecular biology to favorite childhood books. By the time Friday arrived, Emily found herself checking her watch repeatedly, counting the hours until his evening flight landed. Someone's distracted today, Sandra teased, catching Emily glancing at the clock for the third time that hour. The Phase 2 testing results are due, Emily deflected, focusing back on her microscope. Uh-huh. And it has nothing to do with a certain CEO returning from New York tonight? Sandra leaned against the lab bench. The whole office has a betting pool on whether he'll come straight here from the airport. Emily looked up, horrified. Please tell me you're joking. About the betting pool? No, but I did put $20 on him being professional enough to wait until Monday. Sandra winked. Don't make me lose money. Emily rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. After the ethics committee had cleared her research, much of the office gossip had shifted from suspicious to romantic. She'd even overheard two women from accounting sighing over the fairy tale aspect of her relationship with Richard. It's hardly a fairy tale, she'd muttered to herself. More like a complicated, messy, exhilarating uncertainty that kept her awake at night. Just after 6 p.m., as Emily was recording her final observations for the day, her phone vibrated with a text. Just landed. Can I see you tonight? I have something important to discuss. Emily hesitated. The formal tone made her nervous, but she'd been looking forward to seeing him all week. Of course. I'll be home with Lily. Come by whenever you're ready. At home, she found herself rushing through Lily's bedtime routine, then changing her outfit twice before settling on jeans and a soft blue sweater, casual but flattering. She was tidying the already clean living room when the doorbell rang at 8:30. Richard stood on her porch, still in his business suit but with the tie loosened and collar unbuttoned. Despite his usual composure, she could see fatigue in the lines around his eyes. "Hi," she said softly, suddenly shy. "Hi," he echoed, his intense gaze taking her in as if memorizing her after their week apart. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Richard stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her with a hunger that made her knees weak. Emily responded instantly, arms wrapping around his neck as she pressed against him. "I missed you," he murmured against her lips. "More than is reasonable for a week's absence." Emily smiled, drawing him inside. "I missed you too," unreasonably. She led him to the couch, where he sank down with visible relief. "Long flight?" "Long week," he corrected, loosening his tie further. "The board meetings were productive but intense. We've secured funding for 3 new research divisions, including expanded resources for your project." "That's wonderful," Emily said, though she noticed the tension in his shoulders hadn't dissipated. "But that's not what you wanted to discuss, is it?" Richard shook his head, a small smile acknowledging her perceptiveness. "No, it's about us. You, me, and Lily." He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "While I was in New York, I received several calls from my PR team about the photos of us at the gala. They're concerned about public perception, possible shareholder reactions, the usual corporate image considerations." Emily felt her heart sink. "They want you to distance yourself from me. Actually, they suggested I make a formal statement acknowledging our relationship." Richard's expression was unreadable. "They believe transparency would generate positive publicity and prevent speculation." "Oh," Emily wasn't sure how to respond. "And what do you think?" "I think," he said carefully, "that I need to know where you see this going before I make any public statements about us." The directness of the question caught Emily off guard. They'd been carefully dancing around, defining their relationship, content with the ambiguous space between professional association and personal intimacy. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything's happened so quickly. 6 months ago, I was grieving Tom, just trying to survive each day for Lily's sake. Now I'm here, with you, feeling things I didn't think I'd feel again. It's wonderful and terrifying, and I'm not sure I'm ready to put a label on it." Richard nodded, disappointment flashing briefly in his eyes before his neutral expression returned. "I understand. It was unfair to put you on the spot." "No," Emily said, reaching for his hand. "It's a fair question. I just don't have a clear answer yet. What about you? Where do you see this going?" He entwined his fingers with hers, studying their joined hands. "I see possibilities I haven't allowed myself to consider in years. A life beyond work. A family, perhaps." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But I won't pressure you, Emily. You've been through tremendous loss. You have Lily to consider. I can wait until you're ready for more, if you ever are." The vulnerability in his usually guarded expression made her heart ache. Without thinking, she moved closer and kissed him softly. "I'm not saying no to more," she whispered against his lips. "I'm just asking for time." "Time you shall have," he murmured, drawing her into his arms. They sat that way for a while, the silence comfortable between them. Eventually, Emily asked about his meetings in New York, and Richard detailed the corporate negotiations and research proposals he'd reviewed. She told him about Lily's newest accomplishments and the vindication of the Ethics Committee's decision. "I should check on Lily," Emily said eventually, reluctantly disentangling herself from his embrace. "May I come with you?" Richard asked. "Just to see her? I've missed her too." Emily nodded, touched by his genuine affection for her daughter. In Lily's room, they found the toddler sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand clutching the stuffed bunny Tom had bought when they first learned Emily was pregnant. Richard watched her with a tender expression that made Emily's chest tighten. "She looks like you when she sleeps," he observed quietly. "Same little furrow right here." He touched the space between Emily's brows gently. "That's what Tom always said." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she tensed, afraid she'd ruined the moment by invoking her late husband. But Richard only nodded, his hand finding hers in the darkness. He was right. Back in the living room, Richard checked his watch reluctantly. "It's late. I should go." "Or you could stay for a while," Emily suggested. "I have wine, or coffee, or we could just talk more." Richard smiled, the most unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "I'd like that." They settled back on the couch with glasses of wine, talking well past midnight. Emily found herself sharing stories about Tom and was surprised to find it didn't hurt as much as expected. Richard listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than jealousy or discomfort. In turn, he spoke more openly about his sister Catherine and the impact her death had on his family. "My parents never recovered," he explained. "My father retreated into work, my mother into depression. By the time I was 14, I was effectively alone. Catherine's death carved a hole in our family that nothing could fill." "Is that why you never married?" Emily asked gently. "Fear of losing someone again?" Richard considered the question. "Partly, but it was also ambition. I wanted to build something that would prevent other families from experiencing what mine did. Everything else seemed secondary. And now? Now I'm sitting in a living room at 1 a.m., talking about my feelings, wondering how my priorities shifted so dramatically in a few months." He smiled ruefully. "You've disrupted my carefully ordered existence, Emily Warren." "Is that a complaint?" she teased. "A wonder," he corrected, setting down his wine glass and drawing her closer. When they kissed this time, it was unhurried, deep, and filled with a tenderness that brought tears to Emily's eyes. For the first time since Tom's death, she felt fully present in the moment, not haunted by the past or anxious about the future. "I should really go," Richard said eventually, his forehead resting against hers. "Early meeting tomorrow." "On Saturday?" "International conference call with our European division, the curse of global business." He stood reluctantly. "But I'd like to see you both tomorrow afternoon if you're free. There's a place I want to show you." "We're free," Emily confirmed, walking him to the door. "Text me the details?" Richard nodded, stealing one last kiss before stepping onto the porch. "Good night, Emily." "Good night," she replied, watching until his car disappeared down the street. The next morning, Emily woke to a text message with an address and a simple instruction. "Dress casually. Bring Lily's swimsuit if she has one." Intrigued, Emily packed a bag with towels, sunscreen, and Lily's tiny swimsuit. At precisely noon, Richard arrived in a vehicle she'd never seen him drive before, a practical SUV rather than one of his luxury cars. "New purchase?" she asked as he helped secure Lily's car seat. "It seemed more suitable for family outings than the Aston Martin," he replied casually, though the implication of his words, family outings, hung in the air between them. They drove north out of the city, Lily babbling happily in the back seat. Richard seemed more relaxed than Emily had ever seen him, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to touch Emily's hand. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked as they turned onto a private road leading through dense forest. "Somewhere I haven't visited in years," he replied cryptically. The road eventually opened up to reveal a stunning modern cabin nestled on the shore of a small private lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the surrounding pines and water, while a wraparound deck extended over the shoreline. "This is beautiful," Emily breathed as Richard parked in front of the cabin. "It was my parents' weekend house," he explained, helping Lily from her car seat. "After they died, I nearly sold it. Too many memories, but something stopped me." He looked at the cabin with a mixture of nostalgia and resolve. "I had it renovated recently, thinking perhaps it was time to create new memories here." The significance of him bringing her to this place, a connection to his past, a gesture toward a possible future, wasn't lost on Emily. "Thank you for sharing it with us," she said softly. Inside, the cabin was both luxurious and welcoming, with comfortable furniture and warm lighting that contrasted with Richard's sleek city penthouse. Lily immediately toddled toward the windows, pressing her hands against the glass as she stared at the lake. "Water!" she exclaimed excitedly. "That's right, Sweet Pea," Emily said, joining her daughter. "Should we go swimming?" Richard showed them to a bedroom where they could change. When they emerged in their swimwear, Emily was surprised to see him in board shorts and a t-shirt rather than his usual formal attire. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a rare grin. "I do know how to relax occasionally." The afternoon passed in a blur of simple pleasures, splashing in the shallow water with Lily, a picnic lunch on the deck, exploring the wooded trails around the property. Richard was a different person here, away from the corporate environment, more relaxed, quicker to smile, and completely focused on making Lily giggle with his silly voices and games. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the lake, Emily found herself watching Richard as he helped Lily build a sand castle at the water's edge. The tenderness in his expression, the patience with which he followed the toddler's nonsensical instructions, made her heart swell with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. "What are you thinking?" Richard asked, looking up and catching her gaze. "That I'm glad I'm here," she answered honestly. "With you, both of you." He smiled, the sunset light warming his usually stern features. "So am I." That night, after putting Lily to bed in the cabin's second bedroom, Emily joined Richard on the deck, where he had opened a bottle of wine and lit a small fire in the outdoor pit. "Thank you for today," she said, accepting the glass he offered. "It's been perfect." "It has," he agreed, settling beside her on the cushioned bench. "I've been thinking about your request for time, Emily, and I want you to know that I meant what I said. I can wait, but I also want to be clear about my intentions." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Which are?" Richard set down his wine and took her hands in his. "I want to build a life with you and Lily. Not immediately, not before you're ready, but eventually. I've spent years focused solely on my company, on creating treatments and cures, on living up to the promise I made to Catherine's memory. But these past months with you have shown me what I've been missing." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." Looking into his eyes, so full of earnest hope and carefully restrained emotion, Emily made a decision. She set down her wineglass and shifted closer to him. "I can't predict the future," she said softly, "but I know that right now, in this moment, I want to be with you, and I'm willing to take a chance on whatever comes next." The smile that spread across Richard's face was like sunrise breaking through clouds, radiant and transformative. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. "That's all I ask," he whispered into her hair. "A chance." As they sat together watching the stars emerge over the lake, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected to find again. The journey ahead might be complicated, but for tonight, this was enough. The warmth of Richard's arms, the sound of Lily's soft breathing through the baby monitor, and the promise of new beginnings on the horizon. Over the next month, Richard became a fixture in Emily and Lily's lives. Weeknights often found him at their dinner table, helping with Lily's bedtime routine before he and Emily would talk for hours on the couch. Weekends were spent at the lake cabin or exploring Seattle's child-friendly attractions. Lily perched happily on Richard's shoulders as they navigated children's museums and aquarium exhibits. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, though everyone knew about their relationship. Emily's research continued to show promising results, and she was careful to document everything meticulously, aware that her work would face extra scrutiny because of her personal connection to the CEO. One Saturday morning in late spring, Emily was preparing breakfast when her doorbell rang. Richard wasn't expected until noon, so she was surprised to find Tom's parents, Margaret and David Gilbert, standing on her porch. "Mom, Dad, I wasn't expecting you." Emily embraced them, genuinely happy to see them despite the surprise visit. They had been supportive after Tom's death, frequently driving down from Bellingham to help with Lily. "Come in. Lily's still sleeping, but she should be up soon." Margaret, a petite woman with Tom's kind eyes, followed Emily to the kitchen. "We were in the area for David's doctor appointment and thought we'd surprise our girls." Her smile was warm, though Emily detected a hint of tension. "And we wanted to meet this new man in your life. Tom Jr. mentioned him when we called last week." Emily winced at the nickname. Sandra occasionally watched Lily, and Emily had asked her not to call Richard Mom's boyfriend around the toddler. Apparently, Sandra had improvised with Tom Jr. instead, not realizing Lily would repeat it to her grandparents. "His name is Richard," Emily said, busying herself with coffee preparations. "Richard Morton." "The pharmaceutical company?" David asked, his bushy eyebrows rising. "That Morton?" Emily nodded. "He's my boss. Well, technically my boss's boss." Margaret and David exchanged a look that Emily pretended not to notice. Before they could respond, Lily's voice called out from her bedroom. "Perfect timing," Emily said, relieved by the interruption. "I'll get her." When she returned with a sleepy-eyed Lily, the toddler's face lit up at the sight of her grandparents. "Gamma! Gampa!" she squealed, wriggling out of Emily's arms to run to them. For the next hour, the conversation remained safely centered on Lily, her developmental milestones, and David's health issues. Emily was just beginning to relax when Margaret set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Emily, dear, you know we only want what's best for you and Lily," she began. Emily tensed, recognizing the prelude to a difficult conversation. "I know that. It's only been 10 months since Tom passed," Margaret continued gently. "We're concerned that perhaps you're moving too quickly with this relationship." "Richard understands that I'm still grieving," Emily said, keeping her voice calm. "He's not trying to replace Tom." "But he is in Lily's life," David interjected. "She's at an impressionable age. She barely got to know her real father, and now there's this new man who respects Tom's memory and cares deeply for Lily," Emily finished firmly. "I would never introduce someone into her life who didn't." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. "Of course, dear. We just worry. And when Sandra mentioned he's quite a bit older and some rich CEO, Emily tried not to bristle at the characterization. "Richard is 41, and yes, he's successful, but that's not why I'm with him." "We'd like to meet him," David said, his tone making it sound more like a challenge than a request. "If he's going to be part of our granddaughter's life, we should know him." Emily hesitated, mentally calculating. Richard wasn't due for hours, and she'd planned to warn him about this visit. But perhaps it was better to get this uncomfortable first meeting over with. "Actually, he's coming over later today. You're welcome to stay." The intervening hours were tense, filled with Margaret's well-meaning but pointed questions about Richard's background and intentions. By the time his distinctive knock sounded at the door, Emily felt emotionally drained. She opened the door to find Richard holding a bouquet of wildflowers and a small stuffed penguin, clearly gifts for her and Lily. One look at her face, however, and his smile faded to concern. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. "Tom's parents are here," she whispered. "They want to meet you." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He nodded once, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing for battle. "Ah, I see." Emily led him into the living room where Margaret and David sat stiffly on the sofa while Lily played with blocks on the carpet. The toddler spotted Richard immediately and ran to him with her arms raised. "Richard, up!" Richard set down the gifts and lifted Lily effortlessly, his formal demeanor softening as she patted his cheeks with her tiny hands. "Hello, little one. Have you been good for your mother today?" "She's been a perfect angel for her grandparents," Margaret said, emphasizing the family connection. Richard turned toward them, Lily still in his arms. Mr. and Mrs. Gilbert, it's a pleasure to meet you. Emily speaks of you with great admiration." David stood, extending a hand that Richard shook firmly despite the awkward angle with Lily on his hip. "We understand you're quite important in our daughter-in-law's life these days." The subtle emphasis on daughter-in-law wasn't lost on anyone. Richard set Lily down gently, handing her the stuffed penguin before facing Tom's parents directly. "Emily and Lily are very important to me," he acknowledged. "I know the timing may seem rushed to you, but I assure you my intentions are honorable." "And what exactly are those intentions?" David challenged, ignoring Margaret's warning touch on his arm. Emily started to intervene, but Richard held up a hand. "It's a fair question," he said. "I love your daughter-in-law, Mr. Gilbert, and I adore Lily. I know I can never replace Tom in their hearts, nor would I want to. But I hope, in time, to create a future with them where Tom's memory is honored even as new memories are formed." The directness of his declaration, particularly the word love, which he and Emily had not yet explicitly exchanged, left Emily momentarily speechless. Margaret's expression softened slightly, though David remained skeptical. "You have children of your own?" Margaret asked. "No," Richard admitted, "but I've always wanted a family." "And you think you can just slot into ours?" David's voice rose slightly. "My son hasn't been gone a year and you're already planning to take his place?" "Dad," Emily warned, stepping closer to Richard, "that's not fair." "Life isn't fair," David retorted, grief sharpening his words. "If it were, Tom would be here instead of me." Richard finished quietly. "I understand your anger, Mr. Gilbert, and your protective instinct toward Emily and Lily, but I'm not your enemy. We both want what's best for them." "And you think that's you?" David challenged. "I think that's Emily's choice to make," Richard replied evenly. "I respect her judgment, as I hope you do." The room fell silent except for Lily's oblivious babbling as she played with her new toy. Emily felt caught between worlds. Her past with Tom, represented by his grieving parents, and her potential future with Richard, standing solid and unwavering beside her. "I think," Margaret said finally, her hand on her husband's arm, "that we should give Emily and Richard some time alone. We can take Lily to the park for an hour, if that's all right." Emily nodded gratefully. "That would be nice. Her stroller is by the door." After they left, Emily collapsed onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. Richard sat beside her, leaving a small, respectful distance between them. "I'm sorry," she began. "They're usually not so. They're protecting their son's legacy and their granddaughter's future," Richard interrupted gently. "I'd be disappointed if they didn't challenge me." Emily looked at him with newfound appreciation. "You meant what you said? About loving me?" Richard reached for her hand. "Every word. I should have told you privately first, but yes, Emily. I love you. I think I have since that first night at the gala, when you stood there with Lily against your chest, refusing to be intimidated by Patricia Winters or company politics." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me how quickly it happened. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Tom, like I didn't grieve him properly or long enough." "Grief doesn't have a timeline," Richard said, drawing her into his arms, "and love isn't a finite resource. Loving me doesn't diminish what you had with Tom." Emily rested her head against his chest, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I don't think David sees it that way." "He will in time," Richard assured her, "once he sees that I'm not trying to erase Tom's memory, but to honor it by caring for the people Tom loved most." They sat in comfortable silence until Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Lily getting tired, heading back soon." "They're on their way back," Emily said, reluctantly pulling away from Richard's embrace. "Thank you for handling that so well." Richard smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Their family, Emily. Your family, Lily's family. Which means, hopefully someday, my family too." When Margaret and David returned with a sleepy Lily, the atmosphere remained tense, but less openly hostile. They stayed for lunch, during which Richard made a deliberate effort to ask about Tom's childhood and David's construction business. By the time they left in mid-afternoon, Margaret had thawed considerably, while David at least managed a civil handshake. "They'll come around," Emily said as they watched the car pull away. "They just need time." "We have plenty of that," Richard assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Speaking of time, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The company is hosting a research summit in Switzerland next month. I'd like you to present your findings, and I'd like you and Lily to stay afterwards for a proper vacation. The three of us." The thought of an international trip, their first as a unit, a public acknowledgement of their relationship beyond Seattle, both excited and frightened Emily. It was another step forward, another move away from the safe harbor of grief into unknown waters. "I'd need to get Lily a passport," she said, a smile spreading across her face, "and I suppose I should start practicing my presentation." Richard's answering smile was radiant. "Is that a yes?" Emily nodded, wrapping her arms around his waist. "It's a yes." As they stood on her porch, making plans for mountains and lakes halfway across the world, Emily felt the weight of the past lighten fractionally. She would always love Tom, would always mourn what might have been, but life was offering her a second chance at happiness, and she was finally ready to take it with both hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dr. Emily Warren." Richard's voice carried through the conference hall in Zurich, pride evident in every syllable as he introduced her. Seated in the audience of distinguished researchers and pharmaceutical executives, Emily took a deep breath, adjusted her blazer, and rose to approach the podium. The past month had been a whirlwind of preparation, not just for her presentation at Morton Pharmaceuticals' International Research Summit, but for their first overseas trip as a trio. Richard had expedited Lily's passport and arranged for a luxury family suite at a resort in the Swiss Alps following the conference. Now, standing before some of the most brilliant scientific minds in the industry, Emily felt a surge of confidence that surprised her. She had earned this moment through rigorous research and innovative thinking, not because of her relationship with the CEO. "Thank you, Mr. Morton," she began, activating her first slide. "My research explores a novel approach to immunotherapy using maternal antibody transfer mechanisms to enhance treatment efficacy in stage 1 and 2 cancers." For the next 30 minutes, Emily detailed her methodology, findings, and future research directions. The room remained wrapped, with several prominent researchers leaning forward in their seats as she explained the potential applications. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. The Q&A session that followed demonstrated genuine interest in her work. Dr. Heinrich Weber, a renowned immunologist from Germany, was particularly engaged, suggesting a potential collaboration that would expand her research to his clinic in Berlin. "Your approach is most promising," Dr. Weber concluded. "I would be honored to work with you on the clinical applications." As the session ended, Emily was surrounded by colleagues eager to discuss her methods further. Richard hung back, watching with evident satisfaction as she fielded complex questions with confident expertise. When she finally extricated herself, he approached with 2 flutes of champagne. "You were brilliant," he said, handing her a glass. "Weber hasn't collaborated with an external researcher in 5 years. You've impressed the most difficult audience in pharmaceutical research." Emily smiled, excitement bubbling through her veins. It felt right up there. Like everything I've worked for is finally coming together. "To changing the future of cancer treatment," Richard toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "And to new beginnings," Emily added softly, holding his gaze. The reception that followed was a blur of handshakes and business cards. Richard remained nearby, occasionally introducing her to key industry figures, but mostly allowing her to shine independently. By the time they slipped away to check on Lily, who was being watched by the hotel's premium childcare service, Emily felt as though she'd crossed some invisible threshold in her career. "Mama!" Lily squealed when they entered the childcare suite. She was surrounded by colorful toys, her face painted with a butterfly design. "Hello, sweet pea." Emily lifted her daughter, inhaling the familiar scent of baby shampoo beneath the faint aroma of chocolate. "Did you have fun?" "She was wonderful," the caregiver assured them. "Very social with the other children, despite the language differences." Richard paid the caregiver generously before they returned to their suite. As Emily helped Lily wash the face paint off, she caught Richard watching them with an expression of such tenderness it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, self-conscious beneath his intense gaze. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am," he replied simply. "Watching you today, brilliant, confident, commanding a room of the world's top researchers, and now here, so gentle with Lily. I'm in awe of you, Emily." Heat rose to her cheeks. After nearly 3 months together, Richard still had the ability to disarm her with his direct sincerity. "Sweet talker," she teased, deflecting the emotion swelling in her chest. "Is that how you charm all the pharmaceutical executives?" He laughed, moving to help Lily into her pajamas. "Only the exceptionally beautiful and brilliant ones who revolutionize cancer research." The next morning, they left Zurich for the quieter charms of Interlaken, nestled between 2 lakes and surrounded by the majestic Alps. Their hotel's suite offered breathtaking views of snow-capped peaks and emerald valleys. For the first time since arriving in Switzerland, Emily felt the tension of the conference melt away, replaced by the simple joy of exploration. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she breathed, standing on their private balcony while Lily napped inside. Richard joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "I used to come to Switzerland with my parents before Catherine got sick," he said quietly. "We'd hike in the summers, ski in the winters. Some of my few happy childhood memories are here." Emily leaned against him, savoring the rare glimpse into his past. "Thank you for sharing this place with us." The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality. They rode cable cars up mountainsides, Lily squealing with delight at each ascent. They strolled through charming villages where Richard surprised Emily with his fluent German. They took a boat across Lake Thun, the water so crystal clear they could see fish darting beneath the surface. On their 3rd day, Richard arranged for a private picnic overlooking the valley. While Lily chased butterflies under Emily's watchful eye, he unpacked an array of local delicacies: artisanal cheeses, crusty bread, fresh berries, and Swiss chocolate. "I have a surprise for this evening," he announced as they enjoyed the feast. "I've arranged for a babysitter, one of the hotel staff who came highly recommended. I thought perhaps you and I could have dinner, just the 2 of us." Emily hesitated. They hadn't spent an evening away from Lily since their relationship began. "I'm not sure." "It's only for a few hours," Richard assured her. "The sitter will stay in our suite, and we'll be at the restaurant in the hotel. We can check on her between courses if you like." Seeing his eagerness, Emily relented. "All right. It would be nice to have an adult conversation without interruption." That evening, dressed in a simple black cocktail dress she'd packed for the conference, Emily met Richard in the hotel lobby. He looked devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, his usual severity softened by the mountain setting and the warm light of sunset filtering through the windows. "You're stunning," he said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The restaurant occupied the top floor of the hotel, offering panoramic views of the mountains now bathed in the golden pink light of alpine glow. Their table, set apart from others and positioned before floor-to-ceiling windows, provided both privacy and a spectacular vista. Over exquisite food and wine, they talked not of work or research, but of dreams and memories. Richard described his early days founding Morton Pharmaceuticals, the setbacks and breakthroughs that shaped his career. Emily shared stories of her childhood in Oregon, her first chemistry set that sparked her love of science, and the early days with Tom when they were both struggling graduate students. "He would have been proud of you today," Richard said when she mentioned Tom's unwavering support of her research. Tears pricked Emily's eyes at the simple acknowledgement. "He would have been," she agreed softly. "He always believed my work would make a difference someday." Richard reached across the table to take her hand. He was right. As dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate souffle with mountain berry compote, Richard's expression grew more serious. "Emily, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." The formal tone made her stomach tighten with sudden anxiety. "Is everything all right?" "More than all right," he assured her quickly. "It's just, the board has asked me to consider opening a European research division based in either Zurich or Geneva. The focus would be immunotherapy applications, particularly the direction your research is taking." Emily set down her fork. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity for the company." "It is," Richard agreed, "and I'd like you to consider heading the research team." "Me?" Emily's eyes widened. "But I've only been with Morton Pharmaceuticals for 8 months. There must be more senior researchers who—" "None with your vision or your specific expertise in this field," Richard interrupted. "It would mean relocating to Switzerland, of course, a significant change for you and Lily, but the research facilities would be state-of-the-art, and the collaboration opportunities with European medical centers are unparalleled." Emily's mind raced. A career opportunity beyond anything she'd imagined, in one of the most beautiful places she'd ever seen. But it would mean leaving Seattle, leaving Tom's parents, leaving the home where she and Tom had planned to raise their family. "What about us?" she asked quietly, voicing the question that hung between them. "If I'm here and you're in Seattle?" "I'd split my time between the offices," Richard said, watching her carefully. "And eventually I thought perhaps we might consider making a more permanent arrangement." The implications of his words hung in the air. Not quite a proposal, but a step in that direction. A future together. Not just professionally, but personally. "This is a lot to consider," Emily said finally. "I know." Richard squeezed her hand gently. "And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Take time to think about it, about all of it. We don't need to decide anything until we return to Seattle." Emily nodded, grateful for the space to process. "Thank you for believing in me, professionally and personally." They checked on Lily twice during dinner, finding her peacefully asleep each time, the sitter reading quietly nearby. When they finally retired to their suite, Emily stood once more on the balcony, gazing at the moonlit mountains as she tried to sort through her tumultuous thoughts. Richard joined her, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders against the alpine chill. "Penny for your thoughts?" "They're worth at least a franc," she joked weakly. "I'm just processing. Everything is happening so quickly. A year ago, I was watching my husband die, wondering how I'd survive, let alone raise Lily alone. Now I'm being offered the chance to lead international research and considering—" She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the future that had begun taking shape in her mind. "A life with me?" Richard supplied gently. Emily turned to face him, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "Yes. And it's wonderful and terrifying, and I keep waiting for the moment when it feels wrong, when I feel like I'm betraying Tom. But that moment hasn't come." Richard brushed a tear from her cheek. "Perhaps because Tom would want this for you, happiness, fulfillment, love." "I think he would," Emily whispered. "He made me promise, at the end, that I wouldn't close myself off from life, that I'd find joy again, for my sake and for Lily's." "A wise man," Richard said, drawing her into his arms. They stood together in comfortable silence, the moon casting silver light across the eternal mountains. Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. No decision needed to be made tonight. For now, it was enough to be here, in this moment, embracing possibilities she'd never imagined would be hers again. The next day brought an unexpected challenge. They'd planned a cable car journey to one of the highest peaks, but halfway up the mountain, Lily developed a sudden fever. By the time they returned to the hotel, she was flushed and miserable, her usual energy replaced by listless crying. "We should find a doctor," Emily said, pressing a cool cloth to Lily's forehead. Richard was already on the phone, speaking rapid German to the hotel concierge. Within 30 minutes, a local pediatrician arrived at their suite, medical bag in hand. Probable ear infection, the doctor diagnosed after a thorough examination. Common with the altitude changes, not serious, but uncomfortable for the little one. He prescribed antibiotics and pain relievers, which Richard arranged to have delivered immediately from the village pharmacy. Throughout the evening, they took turns soothing Lily, who cried inconsolably despite the medication. "You should get some rest," Richard said around midnight, gently taking Lily from Emily's arms. "I'll walk with her for a while." "You don't have to," Emily began, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I want to," he insisted. "You've been up since dawn. Sleep for a few hours. We'll be fine." Too tired to argue, Emily retreated to the bedroom. She intended to rest briefly, but exhaustion pulled her into deep sleep almost immediately. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. Startled, she checked the time, nearly 8 a.m. She'd slept for over 7 hours. Panic seized her as she rushed to the living area of the suite, only to find Richard asleep on the sofa, Lily curled against his chest, both breathing peacefully. The sight stopped her in her tracks. They looked so right together, so natural. Richard's protective arm curled around Lily even in sleep, her tiny hand clutching his shirt. In that moment, Emily knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, this man, who had stayed up all night walking her sick child, who had never once treated Lily as anything less than his own, was meant to be part of their future. As if sensing her presence, Richard opened his eyes. "Her fever broke around 4 a.m., he murmured, careful not to wake the sleeping toddler. "She's been sleeping peacefully since." Emily knelt beside them, stroking Lily's soft hair. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Richard's free hand found hers. "You don't need to thank me for loving her," he said simply, "or for loving you." In that quiet Swiss morning, with mountains framed in the window and the man she loved cradling her child, Emily found her answer to the questions that had kept her awake. Some journeys couldn't be planned or predicted. Sometimes life offered unexpected paths that led to places more beautiful than any you could have imagined. She was ready to follow this one, wherever it might lead. Returning to Seattle after their magical Swiss interlude felt like waking from a dream. The airport was crowded and chaotic, a stark contrast to the serene alpine landscapes they'd left behind. Lily, still recovering from her ear infection, was cranky throughout the long flight, and Emily felt the weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders as they navigated customs and baggage claim. "Welcome home," Richard said as they stepped outside into typical Seattle drizzle. His driver waited with the SUV, efficiently loading their luggage while Richard secured Lily's car seat. Emily nodded, though home suddenly felt like a complicated concept. Switzerland had awakened possibilities she couldn't easily dismiss. The research opportunity Richard had presented was professionally tantalizing, but the personal implications were even more significant. A fresh start, a new life, building something together far from the shadows of her past. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. The following days brought a cascade of practical considerations. Emily returned to her lab where colleagues greeted her with newfound respect after her successful conference presentation. Dr. Blackwell called her into his office the first morning back. "I've received communiques from 3 different European research centers asking about your availability for collaboration," he informed her, a grudging respect in his tone. "And Weber wants to incorporate your protocols into his next clinical trial." "Impressive." "Thank you," Emily replied, pleased by the validation. "Morton tells me you're considering heading the new European division." Dr. Blackwell removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "It's a remarkable opportunity, but I hope you'll consider the resources we can offer here as well. I've requested additional funding for your project, regardless of Morton's personal interest in you. The implication was clear. Her success stood on its own, separate from her relationship with Richard. It was exactly what she needed to hear. At home, Emily began making lists, pros and cons of moving to Switzerland, questions about schooling for Lily, considerations about housing and healthcare. Richard gave her space to process, though they spoke daily and he visited regularly, always bringing small gifts for Lily, who had fully recovered and now regularly called him Witchard with obvious affection. On Saturday morning, a week after their return, Emily was reviewing research notes at her kitchen table when the doorbell rang. Lily was spending the day with Margaret and David, who had driven down that morning for their regular monthly visit. Emily opened the door to find Patricia Winters on her porch, immaculately dressed despite the weekend. "Ms. Winters," Emily said, unable to hide her surprise. "What brings you here?" "May I come in?" Patricia asked, her usual coldness tempered with something Emily couldn't quite identify. Resignation, perhaps. Warily, Emily stepped aside. Patricia entered, glancing around the modest home with a careful neutrality that was almost more insulting than her previous disdain. "I'll be direct," Patricia said, declining Emily's automatic offer of coffee. "I've been informed by the board that you're being considered to head the European division." "I'm still weighing the opportunity," Emily replied cautiously. Patricia nodded, seating herself primly on the edge of the sofa. "I've also been informed that my position at Morton Pharmaceuticals is being restructured, effectively demoting me to regional HR manager." Emily maintained a neutral expression, though internally she winced. Richard hadn't mentioned any changes to Patricia's role. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said truthfully. Despite their contentious history, she took no pleasure in another woman's professional setback. "Are you?" Patricia's gaze was penetrating. "I've spent 18 years at Morton working my way up while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Then you arrive with your sob story and your baby, catch the CEO's eye, and suddenly you're being fast-tracked while I'm being sidelined." The accusation stung, but Emily refused to be baited. "My research results speak for themselves, as does my conduct. If you've come to suggest otherwise—" "I've come to warn you," Patricia interrupted, her voice dropping. "Richard Morton is not the white knight you think he is. He uses people, discards them when they're no longer useful. I've seen it dozens of times." Emily frowned. "With all due respect, Ms. Winters, if you're here to sabotage my relationship—" "Did you know he was engaged before, to Dr. Elise Chen?" The name blindsided Emily. Richard had never mentioned any previous serious relationships, let alone an engagement. Patricia continued, watching Emily's reaction carefully. 5 years ago, she was a brilliant oncologist, developed a promising treatment protocol that Morton Pharmaceuticals acquired. They were engaged for 8 months. Then she found evidence suggesting one of Richard's flagship drugs had serious side effects that had been minimized in the trial reports. Emily's stomach tightened. That's a serious accusation. Indeed, Elise presented her concerns to Richard, expecting him to launch an investigation. Instead, a week later, the engagement was off, her research discredited, her career in shambles. She left the country. Last I heard, she was practicing in a clinic in Thailand. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked, though the sick feeling in her stomach suggested she already knew. "Because history repeats itself," Patricia said, standing to leave. "Your research is groundbreaking. It could make billions for Morton Pharmaceuticals. But what happens when your findings conflict with Richard's business interests? Will he choose you or the company he built from nothing?" After Patricia left, Emily sat motionless at her kitchen table, her research notes forgotten. She wanted to dismiss Patricia's story as a vindictive lie, but something in the specific details rang true. And why would Patricia fabricate something so easily disproven? Emily reached for her phone, then hesitated. Confronting Richard about this over the phone felt wrong, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and she couldn't simply ignore it. Not when she was considering uprooting her life and her daughter's future. She was still wrestling with her thoughts when the doorbell rang again. This time it was Margaret and David returning Lily earlier than expected. She was getting fussy, Margaret explained as Lily ran to Emily. I think she's still adjusting from the trip. Emily hugged her daughter close, inhaling her familiar scent like an anchor to reality. Thanks for trying. Would you like to stay for lunch? To her surprise, they accepted. As Emily prepared sandwiches, David played with Lily on the living room floor, his gruff demeanor softening as it always did around his granddaughter. We've been thinking about your Switzerland opportunity, Margaret said unexpectedly as she helped Emily slice tomatoes. David's been researching international video calling. He says the picture quality is quite good these days. Emily nearly cut herself in surprise. You know about the job offer? Margaret smiled sadly. Richard called us yesterday. He wanted to discuss how we might maintain our relationship with Lily if you decided to move overseas. He suggested we might visit quarterly and offered to cover the travel expenses. Emotion closed Emily's throat. The thoughtfulness of Richard reaching out to Tom's parents, seeking to preserve their bond with Lily despite the distance. It was exactly the kind of consideration that had made her fall in love with him. He seems to care deeply for you both, Margaret continued, her eyes studying Emily's face. David and we're trying to understand. It's hard, seeing someone else in Tom's place, but we want you to be happy. He's not in Tom's place, Emily said softly. No one ever could be. But he has his own place, one I never expected to find. Margaret nodded, blinking back tears. Tom would want this for you, you know. He told us near the end that his biggest regret was leaving you to face life alone. He made us promise to support you if you found someone new. Emily felt tears spill down her cheeks. He made me promise the same thing, but it still feels complicated. Love always is, dear. Margaret squeezed her hand, especially the second time around. We'll support whatever you decide. By the time Margaret and David left after lunch, Emily had made a decision. She needed to speak with Richard about Patricia's revelations, face to face, before she could move forward with any plans for their future. She texted him, "Can you come over tonight after Lily's asleep? We need to talk." His response was immediate. Of course, everything okay? She didn't answer, unsure how to respond honestly when her thoughts were in such turmoil. Richard arrived promptly at 8, concern evident in his expression when she opened the door. "What's wrong?" he asked without preamble. "Your message worried me." Emily led him to the living room, where she'd been rehearsing this conversation for hours. "Patricia Winters came to see me today." Richard's expression darkened. "I see. I planned to tell you about the restructuring of her position myself, but the board only finalized it yesterday." "It wasn't about that," Emily said. "Or not entirely. She told me about Dr. Elise Chen." Richard went very still, his expression closing off in a way Emily hadn't seen since their earliest interactions. "I see," he repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "Is it true?" Emily asked. "Were you engaged? Did she raise concerns about side effects that were dismissed?" For a long moment, Richard was silent, his internal struggle visible in the tension of his jaw and shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "Yes, we were engaged. Yes, she raised concerns about Immunitol, which was then our most promising cancer drug. And yes, our relationship ended shortly after." He met Emily's gaze directly. "But the rest of what Patricia undoubtedly implied is false." Emily waited, giving him space to continue. "Elise found anomalies in some patient data, potential cardiac side effects that hadn't appeared in the initial trials. I immediately launched an internal investigation and halted distribution pending results." Richard's expression hardened at the memory. Elise wanted more. She demanded we recall the drug immediately, issue public statements, essentially admit liability before we had confirmed her concerns. And you refused. I insisted on following scientific protocol, he corrected. Complete testing, peer review, transparent reporting. What I wouldn't do was panic and potentially deprive patients of a life-saving treatment based on preliminary data. So what happened? Richard sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Elise took matters into her own hands. She leaked her unverified concerns to the press, violating company confidentiality agreements and research ethics protocols. The resulting panic caused several patients to discontinue treatment. 2 died as a result. Emily's breath caught. And the side effects? Were they real? Some were, Richard acknowledged, but far less severe than her data suggested. We modified the protocol, added additional monitoring for high-risk patients, and published the complete findings. The drug went on to save thousands of lives. And Elise? The breach of confidentiality violated the terms of her contract. The board voted unanimously to terminate her. I didn't protect her from the consequences of her actions, despite our personal relationship. His gaze was steady. I would have married her, Emily. I loved her. But I couldn't condone what she did, the risk she created for patients by circumventing proper scientific process. Emily absorbed this, measuring his words against what she knew of him. His unwavering commitment to scientific integrity, his refusal to take shortcuts even when expedient. Why didn't you tell me about her? She asked finally. For the same reason you don't detail every moment of your life with Tom, Richard replied gently. Some things belong to the past. My relationship with Elise ended painfully, but it taught me important lessons about balancing business decisions with personal feelings. I'd like to think I've become better at that balance. Emily nodded slowly, processing. And Patricia? Why would she present it as if you discredited Elise to protect profits? Patricia and Elise were close friends, Richard explained. She's never forgiven me for what she sees as betrayal, though she remained with the company. As for her demotion, it's unrelated. The board made that decision based on her recent performance and conflict with several key team members. He moved closer, taking Emily's hands in his. I've never lied to you, Emily. I never will. The company matters to me. The lives we save, the work we do. But you and Lily matter more. If you have doubts about that, about us, I need to know. Emily looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception. She found only the steady, unwavering honesty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. No doubts, she said finally. Just questions. Thank you for answering them. Richard's shoulders relaxed visibly. Always, he promised, drawing her into his arms. That night, as they sat talking late into the evening, Emily made her decision about Switzerland. The path ahead was becoming clearer with each passing day, each honest conversation, each moment that confirmed what her heart already knew. 2 weeks after her conversation with Richard about Elise Chen, Emily stood in her lab completing the final documentation for her research transfer. She had accepted the position heading Morton Pharmaceuticals' European Research Division, scheduled to open in Geneva in 3 months. The decision, once made, had brought a clarity and purpose that confirmed she was on the right path. So it's official? Sandra asked, helping organize the last of the samples for shipment to the new facility. Emily nodded, a mixture of excitement and nostalgia washing over her. I signed the contract today. We'll move at the end of August once the house sells. I still can't believe you're leaving, Sandra sighed. Though Geneva sounds a hell of a lot nicer than Seattle in winter. And the chocolate. You'd better send care packages. Emily laughed, grateful for her friend's support. Monthly, I promise. Have you told the Gilberts yet? Sandra asked more gently. About the move? Last weekend, Emily confirmed. They're adjusting to the idea. Richard's arrangement for quarterly visits helps, and they're coming to Geneva for Christmas. The conversation with Tom's parents had been difficult, but surprisingly hopeful. David had initially retreated into stoic silence, but Margaret had been pragmatic. We always knew Lily would grow up somehow different than we imagined when Tom was alive, she'd said. We just want to remain part of her life, wherever that might be." Richard had joined them later in the conversation, respectfully answering David's pointed questions about schools, healthcare, and how they would maintain Lily's connection to her father's memory. By the end of the evening, plans had been made for regular video calls and quarterly visits, with a shared online photo album to document Lily's growth between visits. "And what about the house?" Sandra asked, interrupting Emily's thoughts. "Any interest yet?" Emily had listed her Seattle home the previous week, the modest bungalow she and Tom had purchased with such excitement when they'd learned she was pregnant. Every corner held memories, from the nursery they'd painted together to the garden where Tom had built a tiny swing set just weeks before his diagnosis. "2 showings scheduled for this weekend," she replied. "Richard thinks it will sell quickly in this market." "And you're okay with that? Leaving it behind?" Emily considered the question carefully. "The house was our dream, mine and Tom's. But dreams change. I'm ready for a new one." After finalizing the lab documentation, Emily met with Dr. Blackwell for her exit interview. She'd worried it might be awkward, given that she was essentially being promoted several levels above him, but he maintained his usual professional demeanor. "You've done exceptional work here," he acknowledged, signing off on her final reports. "The European division will benefit from your leadership." "Thank you," Emily said sincerely, "for everything. If you hadn't supported my research from the beginning, none of this would have happened." Dr. Blackwell gave her a rare smile. "Morton saw something in you that first night at the gala. I'll admit I was skeptical about his motives. But your work proved him right. Personal feelings aside, he has an uncanny ability to identify scientific talent. It was perhaps the closest thing to a blessing she would get from her mentor." Emily left his office feeling as though one chapter of her professional life had closed properly, making way for the next. She was scheduled to meet Richard at Morton Pharmaceuticals' legal department at 3 to sign her new contract. With 2 hours to spare, she made an impulsive detour. The cemetery was peaceful in the early summer afternoon, sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees and casting dappled shadows across manicured lawns. Emily knew the path to Tom's grave by heart, though her visits had become less frequent over the past months. She knelt before the simple granite headstone, placing the white roses she'd brought against its base. "Hello, Tom," she said softly. "It's been a while. Lily's growing so fast, she's saying new words every day. She called the neighbor's cat a menace yesterday. I have no idea where she picked that up." The one-sided conversation felt both familiar and strange after all these months. Emily brushed her fingers over the engraved letters of Tom's name. "I've accepted the position in Switzerland," she continued. "It's an incredible opportunity professionally, but it means leaving Seattle, leaving this place, leaving you in some ways." Her voice caught. "I want you to know that Lily will always know who her father was. The kind, brilliant, loving man who wanted her so desperately, who would have moved mountains to stay with her if he could have." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, the only response to her words. "Richard asked me to marry him last night," she confessed, the words still new and startling even as she spoke them. "Not right away. He understands I need time. But before we move to Switzerland, he wants us to start our new life there as a family." Emily twisted the simple diamond ring on her left hand. Not an ostentatious symbol of Richard's wealth, but a vintage piece he'd had resized, explaining that it had belonged to his grandmother, the only family member who had shown him consistent kindness throughout his childhood. "I said yes," she whispered. I think you would understand. You told me to be happy, to find someone who would love Lily as his own. Richard does. And he loves me in a way that doesn't diminish what we had, but honors it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'll always love you, Tom. You gave me Lily, and courage, and the strength to keep living when all I wanted was to give up. Part of my heart will always be yours." She remained there in silence for a while longer, the sunlight warm on her face, memories of Tom washing over her, not with the sharp pain of early grief, but with a bittersweet tenderness that acknowledged both loss and healing. When she finally stood to leave, Emily felt lighter somehow, as though Tom himself had granted his blessing for the path she'd chosen. At precisely 3 o'clock, Emily entered the executive floor of Morton Pharmaceuticals, where Richard waited outside the legal department. His face brightened visibly when he saw her. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting the remnants of emotions in her eyes. Emily nodded. "Just saying goodbye to some things? I'm ready now." The contract signing was brief but significant. 3 copies of a comprehensive agreement detailing her position, responsibilities, compensation, and relocation package. As the lawyers and witnesses filed out, Richard remained seated beside her at the conference table. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly, always attuned to the nuances of her emotions. "No," Emily assured him, smiling as she admired the ring on her finger. "Just processing how much has changed in a year. From widowed single mother to engaged research director relocating to Switzerland." Richard took her hand, his thumb caressing the ring. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect. Sometimes it leads us to places far better than we could have imagined. Even when it begins with being kicked out of a gala for bringing a baby," she teased. "Especially then," he replied, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "I should send Patricia a gift basket. Her attempt to remove you that night was the best thing that ever happened to me." Emily laughed, rising from the table. "I should pick up Lily from daycare. Are you still coming over for dinner tonight?" Richard nodded, gathering the contract copies. "I'll bring the Geneva property listings. The real estate agent sent several promising options this morning." That evening, after Lily was bathed and dressed in pajamas, the 3 of them gathered at Emily's dining table. The surface was covered with photographs of Swiss homes, school brochures, and maps of Geneva neighborhoods. "This one has a garden for Lily to play in," Richard pointed out, highlighting a modern villa near the lake. "And it's 10 minutes from the research center." "It's beautiful," Emily agreed, trying to imagine their life in such a place. "But are you sure you want to live there full-time? You'll still need to be in Seattle regularly for the main office." Richard smiled, setting down the listing to focus entirely on her. "I've been meaning to discuss that. The board has approved my proposal to relocate our global headquarters to Geneva over the next 2 years. We'll maintain the Seattle facility as our North American division, but the primary operations will move with us." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You're moving the entire company? Richard, that's enormous. The cost, the logistics, why would you do that?" "Several reasons," he replied calmly. "European pharmaceutical regulations are more favorable for the type of research we're pursuing. The central location provides better access to global markets. The tax advantages are significant." "And?" Emily prompted, sensing there was more. Richard's expression softened. "And I want our family to be together, not separated by an ocean and 9 time zones. I won't repeat my parents' mistakes, prioritizing work over family. Lily deserves better. We all do." Hearing him refer so naturally to "our family" brought tears to Emily's eyes. Before she could respond, Lily climbed into Richard's lap, clutching her favorite storybook. "Read, Richard," she demanded, settling against his chest with complete trust and affection. Richard gathered her close, opening the book with the practiced ease of someone who had performed this ritual many times. As he began reading, his deep voice soft and expressive, Emily felt the last piece of her heart click into place. This was her family now, not replacing what she'd lost with Tom, but building something new and equally precious from the shattered pieces grief had left behind. Later that night, with Lily asleep and the house quiet, Emily and Richard stood on her back porch gazing at the stars. His arm around her waist anchored her in the present moment, while her thoughts drifted between past and future. "The real estate agent called while you were putting Lily to bed," Richard said, There's an offer on the house, above asking price with a flexible closing date. Emily rested her head against his shoulder, absorbing the news. Another step forward, another tie to her past life gently loosening. "Are you sad?" Richard asked perceptively. "Not sad exactly," she answered thoughtfully. "Just aware of the significance. Tom and I poured so much hope into this house. It feels strange to think of someone else living here, making their own memories in these rooms." Richard was quiet for a moment. "We could keep it," he suggested, "as a place to stay when we visit Seattle, for Lily to know her father's home as she grows up." The offer touched Emily deeply, another example of Richard's thoughtful consideration of Tom's place in their lives. But after a moment's reflection, she shook her head. "No," she said gently. "I think it's time to let it go. We'll build our own home in Geneva, with space for Tom's memory and room for our future together." She turned in his arms to face him. "But thank you for offering, for always making space for what came before." Richard brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression solemn. "Tom will always be Lily's father, always part of who you are. I would never want to erase that." "I know," Emily whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. In the weeks that followed, their plans took concrete shape. The house sold quickly, with a closing date that aligned perfectly with their relocation timeline. Emily worked with the research team in Geneva remotely, developing protocols and equipment specifications for the new facility. Richard divided his time between Seattle and Switzerland, overseeing the transition with characteristic efficiency. On their last evening in the Seattle house, after the movers had taken most of their belongings and the rooms echoed with emptiness, Emily tucked Lily into her makeshift bed on the floor of her nearly empty bedroom. "Will Daddy be in Switzerland?" Lily asked sleepily, her pronunciation of the country's name still uncertain. Emily froze, momentarily unsure how to answer. They had shown Lily pictures of Tom, told her stories about him, but at not quite 2 years old, her understanding of death was limited, and now there was Richard, whom she clearly adored. "Your daddy is always with you in your heart, sweet pea," Emily said finally, placing her hand gently on Lily's chest. "And Richard will be with us in our new home. He loves you very much." Lily considered this with surprising solemnity for a toddler. "Two daddies," she declared finally, seeming satisfied with the arrangement. Lucky Lily. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes at the simple wisdom of her daughter's conclusion. "Yes, sweet pea. Very lucky Lily." She found Richard in the backyard, standing by the small cherry tree that Tom had planted when they'd first moved in. It had blossomed beautifully this spring, a riot of pink against the blue Seattle sky. "I was thinking," Richard said as she joined him, "we should take a cutting from this tree, have it grafted and planted at our new home, a piece of here, there." Emily slipped her hand into his, overwhelmed by the gesture. "How do you always know exactly the right thing to say?" He smiled, drawing her close. "Not always, but I'm learning." The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the airport, Emily took one final walk through the empty house. In each room, memories played like film clips, bringing Lily home as a newborn, Tom's last Christmas, the day Richard first came to dinner. Joy and grief, endings and beginnings, all woven together into the tapestry of her life. In the kitchen, she paused to look out at the garden where the cherry tree stood in full bloom. On impulse, she plucked a single blossom, pressing it between the pages of her passport, a symbol of what she was carrying forward from her past into her future. Richard appeared in the doorway, Lily on his hip. "Ready?" he asked gently. Emily took a deep breath, surveying the empty house one last time. Then she turned to face the man and child waiting for her, her family, her future. "Ready?" she confirmed, closing the door behind her without looking back. As their car pulled away from the curb, Emily caught a final glimpse of the house in the side mirror. The morning sun gilded its windows, making them shine like benedictions. For a moment, she could almost imagine Tom standing on the porch, smiling his approval as she embarked on this new chapter. Then, Richard's hand found hers, warm and steady, and Lily babbled happily from her car seat, and Emily turned her gaze forward, toward Geneva, toward their new home, toward the life waiting to be built. The past would always be part of her, but the future stretched before them now, bright with promise and possibility. And for the first time since losing Tom, Emily faced it without fear, with love, with family, with hope. Full circle, she thought, squeezing Richard's hand as they drove toward their tomorrow. Not an ending, but a new beginning. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.